Welcome to Broadcast Astrology, Insight for Humans.
This is Lisa Pesnichek.
And I'm Sarah Beckner, and we're here to deep dive into the fascinating world of astrology.
We offer monthly forecasts based on the new moon charts looking at world astrology,
using both neoclassical and Uranian astrology techniques.
In addition to the forecasts, we offer blind chart readings, interviews with notable guests, and much more.
So keep listening as we bring you Insight for Humans.
Hello, everybody. It's a Scorpio New Moon. It's a doozy, and we're here to talk about it.
That's right. We're looking at the new moon lunation. So this chart that we're pulling up now corresponds to the time period between November 1st and November 30th. So we already know we're in it. We're deep in election season, and the outcomes are just around the corner. And as we pull up this chart, it just gets more exciting, doesn't it, Lisa?
This is a really important chart. I know that the Libra solar eclipse that we just did last month was pretty juicy, but I've been doing a research project on the US presidential election, and this chart's really important to that because from a new moon perspective, this is the predictive chart that you would look to in order to get an idea of the election itself. So it's a great predictive tool in general, just the same way that we've been using these. But because we are in an election season and we have this huge election coming up, this is a really important chart. And in the research that I've done, every time I come across this Scorpio New Moon chart, and I just get, this is not going to be easy. So I know that there's been different themes of this coming up, and I really sense that there's been this build to this chart in this time in particular. And I'll let you jump in just a second, Sarah. I just wanted to put it out there that I thought it was really interesting that this chart has a 22-degree Scorpio ascendant. And I think this is important because the Aries Ingress had a 16-degree Scorpio ascendant. The Sibley Solar Return 2024 chart has a 17-degree Scorpio ascendant. Kamala Harris, her lunar return chart for this time in October 2024 has a 17-degree Scorpio ascendant. And then interestingly, Trump has the reverse for his lunar return covering this election period, which is at 28 degrees Taurus. So the theme here from our perspective largely is that Uranus is in the seventh house, or at least on this ascendant-descendant angle. We'll get into that more, but I just wanted to lay the groundwork for this pattern that we're seeing over and over again in the predictive chart, specifically surrounding this election and pertaining to the United States as well as the candidates who are running in this election.
Like you said, Lisa, we've been talking about Uranus all year since the Aries Ingress. And last year, it was tucked in the sixth house in a cadent house without making any significant aspects. And so through the month of October, as we're recording this now on the 22nd of October, we know that there's a little bit of the calm before the storm. And the minute I pulled up this chart, it was like, oh, here we go, because now we have those big heavy hitters, Uranus and Pluto, making really significant aspects in the chart. We are represented in this chart. Of course, we can always look at the lunation as the people in the leadership, which in this chart is not in a great position in the 12th house of sorrows, of suffering, of all those sorts of things. And then we're also represented by Mars in Cancer, which is opposing Pluto at the anaretic degree. And so there's already just a lot more focalized energy around some kind of crisis, tension point. All of that is magnified by Mars applying to Volcanus. And as I'm speaking, Lisa, I'm just realizing I'm going deep into the astrology, and maybe that's where we start today. We lay out some of the astrology as we see it, and then we can go back to speaking to the layperson a little bit and just put this back into plain English. But it's hard not to talk about what we're seeing when you pull up the chart. Yes, Uranus on the descendant. So a lot of instability this month, a lot of unknowns.
Yeah, I think I was just saying to Sarah, this chart feels like a massive shakedown. The shakedown that we've been waiting to have happen. We've been sensing that it's going to happen. I'm not saying that it's all going to happen this month. However, we all sense, I think, that election is going to have consequences attached to it that are substantial and that disturb the reality that we've lived in for some time. And part of this, I think, could be just preparing for this huge next couple of years of changes, specifically next year when we have 5 major planets shifting signs. And that's huge. That never happens at the same time, as well as just a lot of other planetary activity that's very significant. But this feels like kind of the water, the dam breaking. I'm seeing a chessboard where a move is made where you can't go back. It disturbs the whole play. It's a game-changing move. And it may not be as volcanic as we may be sensing that it is. And maybe it's the anticipation and the buildup that's actually creating part of the astrology that we're seeing. But that said, it cannot be ignored that we are in a moment where there is the possibility for violence, for some level of just disruption that resonates and creates a domino effect into the future for us.
Yeah, we know that when we see Mars and Pluto come together, there's always the potential for great force, great volatility. And then you throw in Volcanus, which sort of magnifies that potential for conflict and violence. But at the same time, I've wondered, because we see Poseidon on the angles so prominently through all of these charts this year, and that Poseidon really brings up the theme of the cultural context and how we're thinking, how we're connecting with the larger world, how we are seeing things. And so, yeah, some of this could just be the ideological warfare that goes on around election time and the difference of opinions. But we're pulled into that picture in a very intimate way in this chart this month. That sort of lends itself to this idea that we're going to be more affected personally by what happens in the coming weeks.
Yeah, and I guess we spoke into this Mars Pluto here. But we also have Mercury Uranus, which Mercury, from a universal perspective, is news. It's people's mindset. It's the way that people are communicating with one another. It can also be children. But specifically in this chart, it represents most importantly, the government, the ruling government. And while it's a strong placement in the first house for this Mercury to be from the perspective of its specific rulership, I think that it's interesting and also a bit unsettling that the government is undergoing some substantial destabilization or shaking up at the same time as the people are opposing Pluto at the anaretic degree. And the anaretic degree in some ways resonates in the same way as Uranus does. It's this breaking apart. It's being on the edge of something. But in order to get there, you have to put yourself into an uncomfortable situation that changes your perspective once you get to the other side. Because a 29th or anaretic degree is when the planet's about to change signs. And so it is about to receive a major shift in its perspective. So both from this perspective, both the people and the government are undergoing a really similar shift, I guess is what I would say.
Yeah, and it's Pluto at the analytic degree. And so part of that process of that turning over is it does involve a death of some sort, something that needs to be composted and remade. So there can be a little bit of a dark night theme with Pluto. It can be being dragged through the mud a little bit. So it's definitely a month of some much stronger themes in terms of these pressures mounting.
Absolutely. All right. Do we want to move over to the dial?
Let's bring up the dial. But you could say, so actually, quickly before we move on, so the opposing leadership, the Republican Party, is in opposition to L12 here. So it's just, I just wanted to point this out because both parties are undergoing their own stresses and strains in the context of an overall chart signature of volatility, instability, etc.
Yeah. No, nobody's feeling like things are super smooth and going the way that they had planned. I think is the overall feeling of this month is the current government is in a uncomfortable position. The potential incoming or the opposing governmental structure is not in a great place. And the people, therefore, are also in a really stressful place. So, yeah, take good care of yourselves. Where do we want to start with the pointer here? You have it
I
on
mean, I think it's fine where it's
you,
at
man.
just to begin because we're seeing some of the hardship and the challenges showing up within families, within friendships, networks, communities. We have Saturn Cupido on the lunation. And some of this is happening around our ideas around leadership. There's Chronos within 1 degree of this picture as well.
And that's maybe the more of the upside of this picture. The part that really struck me was the Hades and Mythos, which feels like there's destruction in the air. There's a breaking down. There's almost like a death or decaying. It's almost as though there's an end of the road that we're reaching. And it feels very resonant to the Mars-Pluto opposition at the 20th degree that's stating the same thing, that there's immense power structures, which I think you can pull in here from the Chronos, which on its own is fine, but then you put it in combination with the Hades and Mythos. And it could be saying that the government is in a point of just immense. It almost makes me wonder if there's going to be some level of government shutdown for some reason. Crosses my mind if there's going to be some obstruction in the government's operation. Also oppression, deep sadness, vulgarity from the government as well. And it's also all connected to this Aries point, which is saying that whatever is happening throughout time is being shared with the world. Everybody's seeing it. It's being broadcasted out. Everybody's interested in what the United States has going on this month. And then we could take it to the MC and Mythos here, which the MC in a chart represents the moment in time. And this moment has a flavor of Mythos to it, which says that there's a hardship, there's the inability to move forward or a coming inward and being fixated on something and unable to pivot. Whatever we're in, even though there's so much chaos ensuing and so many things changing, there's still in this moment a coming in and an inability or a desire to stay the same.
Yeah. And we see the midheavens falling on the Saturn Uranus midpoint.
Mhm.
Um, so again, I think this speaks to what you were just saying about what the structures are going through, what's being broken up and shaken up within the systems right now.
Mhm. Yeah, a good corroboration. The structures are being challenged. And the ways that we've worked for so long within our government isn't necessarily going to be able to sustain itself. I think that the Neptune up here connected as well gives a sense of deterioration to this structure.
Yeah. Some sense of loss or disillusionment or disappointment with the systems themselves.
Absolutely. All right. I think that the last point I wanted to look at here is the Aries point on the 360. And as I was doing my research around this selection, this is something, oops, that stood out for me in several ways. And we have the Aries point, we have Volcanus, and we have Uranus. And what this is saying is that there's worldwide destabilization and violence. And we already know that this is happening. Something that Sarah and I were talking about specifically in the United States is that a lot of our news feeds are being inundated with body counts. And that is disruptive, I think, to all of our nervous systems. And as well as it's just very sad and devastating to the people who are having to actually deal with it. And I have more information about all of this on my website and that sort of thing if you're interested in looking at more of this alignment. But it's heightened and creating this level of tension and nervousness and anticipation. So I really don't want to be feeding into that, but it's also what's there. And I encourage you to take all of this with a grain of salt to some degree, but also if you're feeling it, so is everybody else. We're all in this place of great change right now.
Did you want to talk a little bit, Lisa, about because you saw this was the midpoint signature that you saw with the assassination attempts.
Yes, it is.
And so here we are again at this month looking at the possibility of something sudden and newsworthy. Uranus bringing in that element of a shocking event. And here it's magnified by Volcanus and receiving the trigger from Mars over the course of the month, which can instigate those moments of shock and surprise.
Should I bring up my timeline and show where that is?
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. So this is in the paper that I put together. I just posted the full version on my website if you're interested in checking it out. But so I believe it was on July 13th that uh, Trump's first assassination attempt took place, which was very shocking for everybody. And so, first of all, right here, we have what I was just pointing out on the dial, which is Aries point equals Uranus Volcanus. So, the alignment of Uranus and Volcanus aligning to the Aries point, which states tension being in the air and the potential for disrupting activities. And what heightened that, so if you see right here on July 13th to July 16th, so this is a 1-degree orb, we had the Mars conjunct Uranus. And this was also conjunct Algol, which I think also when you have all of these corroborations coming together, you really get something pretty powerful. But this is aligning up at the same time. And so now this is where we are, October 17th to December 19th. where we have this other alignment of Aries point equals Uranus Volcanus. And here's Mars conjunct Volcanus. So as Sarah was alluding to, Mars is getting closer to Volcanus, and that is going to perfect with a 1-degree orb November 15th to November 26th. So this is when Mars is getting ready to slow down for its retrograde cycle, which is heightening all of this. We also have the Mars opposite Pluto right here taking place October 31st to November 6th. So there's a lot going on right here, which is why I've been thinking, and Sarah's also thinking, what's going to be triggered at this time. And I think it's also really interesting, and I think that we'll learn more about what this April 19th to May 21st represents. But we also have Mars, once it stations direct again, conjoining Volcanus again, and then also opposing Pluto. And that's in the last week of April. So I know this is a long explanation, but I think it's just important to understand what the larger astrological environment is pointing towards, and not to scare anybody, but just to say, look, we're all in it together and we're all going to be fine. We've all lived through stuff like this before, but it's the moment that we're in. Do you have anything you want to say about any of that, Sarah?
No, beyond just reiterating the fact that we are in the calm before the storm, that events are going to happen this month that will shift things, I think, in a way that surprises all of us. There might be some intensity, but like with all things, it doesn't mean it's cataclysmic for us as individuals, but we are going to watch things on the world stage start to shift. And which reminds me that I think it'd be a good idea, Lisa, just to talk about mundane astrological transits and why we look at what is the mundane chart and why are we looking at this more global perspective.
Why don't you jump in?
These are forecast charts where we pull up the lunations for Washington, D.C. so that we can get a sense of what's hitting the country at large. And when we look at that Aries point, which we do every month, it really ties in how our systems, how our country is affecting everyone on the world stage. And it's a way, yes, it does involve politics because we are looking at the larger systems and structures as opposed to the individual. And in many ways, it's not a time, like you said, we're not trying to instigate fear or whatever, because it's a journey. These are broad brushstrokes. And it's one way that we just hone our skills as astrologers as we use these forecast charts to try to understand the planetary influences and how they affect our affairs on Earth.
Mm-hmm. I think it's important to understand, too, where the origins of this came from, of mundane astrology. And for back in the day, they were kings and rulers. And they had a much different, more, in some ways, more personal effect on people because it's just societies were different back then. I think today we could even throw in celebrities into the points that we look at rulers or high-end business people like the owners of Microsoft and even Elon Musk and that sort of thing. They all fit into that same role of people who run the world that we live in. And so I think that one thing that would be interesting for us to pull into would be maybe even looking more to those people outside of just government, the people who we look to, who make major decisions in our world. And that's changed a lot since back in the day. And it can be pigeonholed sometimes into government. And it will always reflect government. But I think also because our world is a little bit more complicated than it used to be, it can also be broader.
Yeah, because my understanding is that's really the roots of astrology. People didn't have birth times down to the minute back, and nor could people really afford the luxury of having a service consulting about their personal affair. And so this really was in the hands of the leadership, the aristocrats, people planning strategic moves in terms of when to go into battle, who should marry, these larger things. So it is part of the origin of the science of astrology and something that we still want to keep alive. Watch the trends, and particularly this year with Poseidon being so prominent, which brings in the culture, the worldview. It is interesting to think about the influence of celebrity or major corporations, conglomerations, and how they influence us as people.
Yeah, right now there's a whole bunch of retail stores like Kmart's going under, and our world is really changing. Brick and mortar big stores like CVS and Walgreens are closing around the United States. And that's huge. But now our world is changing and we don't need those stores in the same way as we used to. We have Amazon now.
And we have Pluto going into Aquarius.
Yes, we do.
We're done with that on the level of the material world and acquisition and acquiring. And now we've got Pluto in Aquarius for a long duration, really speaking to how the world's going to change as a result of the level of connectivity and communication and all of those things.
We have Uranus on its way out of Taurus, which is the disruption of goods and services and earthly things, into the sign of Gemini, which is going to jive with all of the technological advances that we're going to encounter with Pluto in Aquarius. So there's a lot that's pointing towards this change. And I think that the astrology that we're looking at, it does incorporate a lot of the political stuff and the cultural climate that we live in. But I think it's also much vaster than that as well. I'm glad that we're having this conversation right now because sometimes it's hard to keep opening it into all of the different layers of how that's occurring in the world.
Yeah, because the broader you get, in many ways, the language gets simpler or repetitive because we're coming back to these archetypal themes, which are universal, and it almost becomes mythological. These ideas of the growth cycle and the birth and the decay and the turnover. And I mean, on some level, astrology is really just a track record of these cycles about how we do this, like on all levels.
I
The
love that.
macrocosm and the microcosm, the systems, the institutions, our personal lives. And so we'll get into more as time goes on.
Yeah.
We'll do more. We'll try to expand it to touch on all of those things as we do more blind chart readings, as we interview different people with different perspectives, as we can even do some predictive stuff with individual charts and show forecasting on that level.
Yeah.
All kinds of good stuff coming.
Yeah. Thanks for joining us today. I really wish everybody the best as we navigate through this month. And I think for most of us, we're just going to be watching the chaos unravel, and from the comfort of our couch, our cell phone, take care of yourselves and be patient with other people because we're all feeling this tension and the stress, and humans don't like to change. They really don't. No, be patient with all of your fellow humans as all of us collectively navigate this huge transformational time that we're in, because we're all here for it. And I think Poseidon might be reminding us just to stay on the higher level and keep the broader view of love and compassion and kindness.
Love, compassion, kindness, and hold on to your hats. Let's see you next month.
I'll see you next month. I'm sure it'll be all better. Take care, everybody. As always, thanks for listening to Broadcast Astrology Insight for Humans. And if you're so inclined, like, follow, and subscribe, and please don't be a stranger.
Signing off for now. Until next time, humans, keep your gaze upwards on the stars and be well. We look forward to sharing more soon.